At the beginning of this, I talked about an analogy that can be made between the observer or the audience and a work of art. And I tried to say that because of what art is, because it has this integrity to itself, this way of being to itself, what I called later its autonomy, if you're going to come to understand it, you have to understand it very much in the way that you come to understand a person, right? It's this that's at the heart of the aesthetic attitude for Deutsch. Here's what I mean, or what I take Deutsch to mean, I guess I should say. If you come at art with the idea that it will just affect you and change you, that you're just going to come in and say, okay, hit me, I'm here. Here's my senses, hit me. Chances are you're not going to encounter a work of art. You might encounter a very stimulating and interesting object, and it might be pretty, and it might be loud, and it might be forceful, and it might be all sorts of things. And it certainly might even change you in some ways, or change your mood. But you're not really encountering it as a work of art. And I'll tell you why. It's because you're not trying to develop an empathetic embrace of its spiritual force. Remember, for Deutsch, what you got with a work of art is something that a way in which the work has been created and generated an internal rightness to itself, a dignity to itself, a way in which it stands and sort of stands on its own, autonomously, by its own force, right? By its own vitality, its own way of being. And to know that, to know what that is to, in some sense, make yourself ready to assimilate and participate in it. An audience has to have a creative imagination too. Not the way that the artist does, but they have to be able to bring themselves to it in a way where they can say, all right, this is what this thing is. This is the way in which it stands. This is how it is, and this is how I'm going to come to know it and participate in it and see these different things within it. Now, given that that's the case, you can't come to a work of art blankly. You can't come to it without some degree of engagement. You have to come with the idea that you are ready for this embrace and that you will come to assimilate these different parts of this work in whatever world it is. You'll come to recognize what these different dimensions that have been assimilated are. So in the way that you recognize the features of a person that you're coming to know, to befriend, or to love even, right? You come to discern the meaning and dimensions and directions of it. You begin to see its strengths and its weaknesses and all these different parts of it. And finally, there comes to the way in which you begin to appropriate. You begin to say, this is what this means. This is what this is. This is how I shall take this aesthetic object and this experience, aesthetic experience, and place it in my mind, in my heart, in my way of understanding the world. So it is very much like coming to know a person. And there's actually one thing I would add to this too. I think in the same way that there's always an element of risk as you come to know a person, that there's a vulnerability, that you have to come to expose yourself, that you have to risk being changed, or changing the other person. So it is with a work of art. There's an element of risk there. You might not necessarily like what you encounter, and you might not even know the way in which you're not necessarily going to like it. But it's only by virtue of doing that that you can come to actually engage in the dignity and the possibility, really in the freedom and the beauty of what there is in the world through art. And that's, I suppose, one of the great cultural achievements of our capacity to make art as human beings, is that we can generate these ways of being right and this rightness in these representations, in these expressions, these representational expressions of our creative imagination, and find new ways of being that we hadn't even considered before. So this is what we have, is a way of finally of not just having an artist and not just a work of art, but an audience that has to come to this and engage it in a particular way, and from this unlock and reveal the life and the freedom and the beauty within the work of art. I'll conclude by just reading this passage from Deutsch. Since it's the chapter that's this page that's here. I think it summarizes it nicely. And while you can look at it too, I'll put it on here for you to consider. We can read it together. So, a work of art, even though culturally embedded, thus has its own intentionality, which is precisely its aiming to be aesthetically forceful, meaningful, and beautiful. A work of art is aesthetically forceful to the degree to which it manifests an immanent spiritual power, which power or rhythm of being is everywhere present in the work and is discerned as a unique vitality. A work of art is inherently significant, is meaningful to the degree to which it realizes the possibilities that give itself rise to realization, being a bringing of the work to a right conclusion and an exhibiting of the process by which the right conclusion is reached. A work of art is beautiful to the degree to which it presents as its own presence a formal achievement, a radiance and splendor of form that is appropriate to it, to its being. And a work of art is an object for consciousness and is experienced by assimilation of its aesthetic force, of recognition of its inherent meaning, and of discernment of its beauty, the three together forming a single process of experience that culminates in a self-appropriation or realization of the self's own spirituality. This is the freedom that I was talking about. A work of art is thus that created object which, when realizing its own intentionality, is at once imitative and expressive, and performs for consciousness its own aesthetic content. And this is what we have.